What's going on, YouTube? This is Acadius, and with the supposedly planned release of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, there is no time like the present to dive into this upcoming game and try to determine whether or not buying it on day one is a smart move. So, in order to have a solid understanding of Bloodlines 2, and if we should spend our money on it, we need to take a look at its origins first. Vampire the Masquerade was originally a pen and paper tabletop role-playing game that was released by White Wolf Publishing in 1991, and similar to Dungeons & Dragons, there were many updated versions to the game released over the years, with the latest edition having released just a few years ago in 2018. And the first thing you should know is where the game gets its name from. Vampire the Masquerade quite literally means vampires that masquerade as humans, but it's much more than just that simple interpretation. Within the game's universe, there is a governing organization of vampires, the Ventrue, and if you break vampire law, known to vampires as the Masquerade, you could get executed on the spot. One of those laws are that no vampire shall do anything or otherwise commit any action that is not considered to be within the scope of normal human capability while in public. Just listen to this NPC from the first Bloodlines game explain it.
The Masquerade, you're gonna be hearing a lot about this, so let me sum up real quick. Sure, you're a vampire, great. Keep it to yourself, okay? It's easier that way, trust me. That's the Masquerade. Keeping vampire secrets secret. Easy, right? Easy peasy. Now, if you violate the Masquerade, if you run around spooking humans or whatever, you make things harder on all of us. Then all of us get pissed off and we come after you. And you end up like your sire there, staked and baked. Comprende, kiddo?
So we find that there are limitations within the world. You cannot feed on humans in public. You cannot use vampire powers in public that are easily perceptible to the average human. For instance, you can use vampiric mind control powers for certain things in public, but you cannot make living creatures spontaneously combust by boiling the blood in their veins while in public. Honestly, the tabletop goes into a ton of detail about the world and how things work, like how do you know how strong you are compared to other vampires? Well, you just need to know how many generations you are away from what is considered to be the original vampire, Cain. If you are interested in the nitty-gritty details of how this world works, then I highly encourage you to look it up or find a YouTuber who is into the tabletop game. And the next thing you need to know is that the game primarily centers around two things. One is the various political sects that the player can join, and two are the 13 vampire clans, aka Bloodlines, and the power struggles that go on between them all. The more that I think about the political struggles that goes on between various sections of vampires, and the fact that the original game took place in a cityscape, it just starts to remind me of the originals, if you've seen that TV show. And if you haven't seen that show, I highly recommend that you watch it. It's a great show. Depending on what clan you choose will decide what vampire powers you can have access to, and it also affects the appearance of your character, some to minor degrees, but some to major degrees. Some vampire clans, such as the Nosferatu, change to such a degree that they cannot allow themselves to be seen at all in public, and if they do, then that would be a masquerade violation and they could get executed for it. Now that we have a warm and fuzzy, ham-fisted idea of how the world works, let's take a look at the creators of the first game. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines was originally created by a now defunct company called Troika Games. Troika operated between 1998 to 2005, and they produced 3 games during that short time. So what factors contributed to the downfall of Troika? Well, one issue was that the devs were what some might call overly ambitious. They severely underestimated just how much work that creating a game like this would be. Having to ask for several extensions and more money from Activision, but when you consider how well loved and fleshed out Vampire the Masquerade is, then I would personally say that they were perfectly ambitious. But it can't be denied that there was a lot of mismanagement on the part of the developers. The other issue was Activision. Big shocker, right? Instead of fully supporting the project and believing in it, they continually tried to rush them and set tight budget and time constraints on the project and ultimately forced Troika to not only release a buggy, unfinished product, but they forced them to release it on the same day as what was the most highly anticipated game of that year, Half-Life 2. Now that I think about it, kind of makes sense why I didn't finish that game. I was playing Half-Life 2. Duh. Now it's worth it to wonder to yourself, if Activision and Troika were contractually obligated to not release Bloodlines before Half-Life 2, which they were due to Bloodlines using the same engine to make their game, then why the hell would Activision be constantly hounding Troika to finish their game so much? They damn well knew they couldn't release it until Valve released Half-Life 2 anyways, so just chill and give the team what they need to make the game as good as possible. And for crying out loud, do not release the game on the same day as Half-Life 2. Give it a few months at least, you moron publisher. It's fine though, because they're still a moron publisher, nothing's changed. But little did Activision know, Troika was very much ahead of their time. So the original Bloodlines game released in 2004, and it was such a good game that it actually garnered positive reviews, despite having a lot of bugs and glitches, and some were so game-breaking that it would prevent the completion of the game for some players. Just imagine if Cyberpunk had actually gotten generally positive reviews on release, even in the dismal state that it released in, and you were in the ballpark. The game was just that good for its time. The game begins by giving you a personality test in order to recommend to you which vampire clan that you should play as, but just like in Hogwarts, you can choose a different clan if you want to. And on a side note, I really miss these personality tests from back in the day in video games, and I was very much looking forward to the one in Hogwarts, just to be let down by an extremely simple and obvious test. At any rate, the game did not allow us to play as any of the 13 clans because that would have been much too complex for a game of that time. Instead, we were given a selection of 7 clans to choose from, and the game featured the ability to play in either first or third person perspective, and it had an intricate dialogue system where your choices could affect how the story played out. Wait a minute, that sounds familiar. Oh right, yeah, it's that one thing that one company keeps always trying to do, but then they can never seem to get it right. You know what company I'm talking about, right Todd? You know the company I'm referring to.
All of this just works. I'm not kidding.
Honestly, I've never thought about it before, but this game may have been the first, or at least close to the first, game to use this type of face-to-face dialogue system that also allows your choices to alter the story of the game.
The tide goes out, the tide comes in, and then it waves goodbye again. It'll take me a few years to wake this city up.
I would be interested to know if another game came before this one that used the same system, and if anybody out there knows, then tell me about it in the comments below. And just look at these facial expressions and mouth and eye movements while you interact with the NPCs, and remember that this game came out in 2004.
What? Oh my, a Malkavian. This ought to be absolutely delicious. 2 minds as crazy as ours, and who knows just what might happen.
You know, there was another game that just released that tried to do something similar. What was it again? And let's not forget this little gem from 2017.
Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything.
So 19 years into the future, and Todd still can't get it right. Makes perfect sense. 19 years of technology advancement, and they still can't match what Troika did in Bloodlines. Duly noted. Now, the story of the game and characters are credited by most to have been written by a man named Brian Mitsoda. But when you dig into it, then you find that the water is a bit murky on this subject. The best consensus I could find is that it was a joint effort, but all the most loved characters were written by Brian, and the best main character dialogue was written by him as well, which most people say is the Malkavian dialogue. So now let's take a look at the upcoming release of Bloodlines 2, and let's start by taking a look at the trailer.
In the sound of the silence, I can move like the wind. With the eyes on my target, I will bloom in my sin. Wide awake like I'm dreaming, getting closer to midnight, 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 midnight.
Can you hear it? My blood is singing. I will wait for you.
Well then, now we know exactly what to expect when we play the game, right? Right? Clear as mud.
Right.
I'm so glad that trailer could just clear up so many questions for us. This game was originally pitched to Paradox Interactive by Hardsuit Labs because Paradox is the current rights holder. Later, Hardsuit Labs was removed from the project, and now the game is currently being developed by a studio called The Chinese Room, which literally has no experience with making a role-playing game of this type or scope. The Chinese Room is most known for making the Amnesia games, and I assure you that I have never played those games because they looked boring. There have been other gameplay snips that have been released, and all of them center around combat. The original game did have combat, but it was in no way central to the game. There were many ways to play through the first game, to include stealth-centric play as well as manipulative play with vampire powers, so combat was not always necessary depending on what clan you had picked. It was always about character development, dialogue, the story. You know, this was mainly like playing through a book, and then sometimes you get to have some fun combat, you know, depending on how you wanted to play. Some characters could be more combat-centric if you wanted to do that, but that wasn't the driving force of this game. And originally, the man, the myth himself, Brian Mitsoda, had been hired to do the writing for the game, but due to creative differences, he was removed from the project, as well as two other devs from the original game that had been hired along with him. Now, if we consider that this game is titled Bloodlines 2, then it should be safe to assume that some of the immortal vampires from the first game are still alive and kicking in the sequel, but we don't see them in the trailer. Also, Hardsuit Labs was originally going to go with the tried and true method of starting your character off as a newly made and weak vampire, but the Chinese Room has changed that, so now you start off as an already very strong elder vampire that has been asleep and recently awoken. And this sounds fun at first glance. It may work in other games, but I don't believe it's going to work right in this game in particular because it goes against the RPG elements of the game from its tabletop role-playing days. How can a player feel satisfied from building up their character if their character is already built up when they first play them? It worked in V Rising because we weren't really building up our vampire that much. It was more about building the base, and just over time we got new spells. That's it. But it's a lot more in depth in Vampire the Masquerade. And in this iteration, we only get 4 different choices of vampire clans. But the new direction with the Elder Vampire actually makes sense when you look at the clips that have been put out there. All the clips, and even the official trailer, have one thing in common: combat. Tons and tons of combat. So they made the player a more powerful vampire from the start, so they can justify putting a lot more vampire powers into the game, and they can justify those powers being way stronger as well. And if you also remember the total affront to gaming that was their Battle Royale game, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodhunt, then suddenly everything begins to become clear. They don't just want to make a game that's a great standalone single-player game. They want to spawn a live service game off of that franchise. And in my opinion, a Battle Royale game does not belong in this vampire-based universe. And that's why Bloodhunt tanked. And if you look at the videos of Bloodhunt, then you're going to see a lot or all of the same vampire powers used in Bloodhunt, and you're going to notice that there are a lot of them are in the trailers for Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. And once you start to dig into the original tabletop game and its fan base, and the first Bloodlines game and its fan base, then you will quickly realize just how passionate the fans really are. I mean, these people are passionate. Very passionate.
The game has done a ton of world building. That's my look at Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines.
And in my experience over the years, anytime you have a very passionate fan base and those fans basically keep your game or movie hype alive, and then you finally decide to make a sequel, maybe don't piss off those people, right? Maybe you should be very careful not to completely alienate your hardcore fan base. I'm just saying, which it seems like this game may actually end up doing due to all the changes that they're making to the game compared to the original game and the tabletop. A good rule of thumb when you don't know much about a franchise is just to look at the hardcore fan base, and if they are upset, either stay away or approach with caution. And if YouTubers like Cannot Be Tamed, who was definitely overwhelmed with passion when she made that video, if people like her and Apollo Speaks end up getting super upset once they release Bloodlines 2, then I will definitely take that as a sign to stay the hell away. Links to their videos in the description below. If that happens, I'm just gonna save my money and wait for a Steam sale so I can buy it for $10. And let's not forget that this project has now switched developers. Most of the time when we have seen things like this occur, when the game was finally released, it was garbage. So if this game actually turns out to be some kind of amazing blockbuster game, then it will definitely be a shocking turn of events. It can't be denied that this game has a lot of things going against its odds of success. I still hope that I am wrong about it because the first game was so interesting. But that's how I feel about Bloodlines 2, but what do you think? Do you think the game will actually succeed, or are we all just waiting around to be disappointed again? Will things actually ever just work for Todd? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.